Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Young, and I'm the project coordinator for the Ohio Network for Innovation. Wanted to thank you for taking the time today to learn a little bit more about supported decision making. Now, this particular presentation is really focused on parents and families of young children and supported decision making. We have some other resources and videos available. If you check out our Facebook page, it's probably the best place right now to find them. Just look for Ohio Network for Innovation. At the end of this presentation, you'll see my contact information as well, so you can contact me with other questions that you might have, or if you're looking for additional resources. But we're going to go ahead and get started. And I wanted to first ask all of you to think about a time in your life when you learned a new way of doing something. Now, maybe you had always done something a certain way because it's what you were taught or what you were told. And then all of a sudden, you realize it's not the only way. You just didn't know that there were other options until you did. And sometimes that can feel like a whole other world opening up. We've all had those experiences, and most of us are better for it. So today we're going to talk about another way of doing something that's very important to most parents and families, and that's helping your son or your daughter or your loved one live a good life. Now, we might challenge some of your assumptions while we're talking, and that's okay. At the end of our time together, I just want you to feel like you know you have options, that there isn't just one way, and that some of these other options might be really beneficial for you and your family. So let's start here at the life trajectory. Now, you may or may not have seen this before, but this is basically a backwards planning tool. It helps us talk about what we want to happen in our own life or in the life of someone that we care about, and then figure out how we get there, what steps we need to take. So we kind of start at the very bottom left and then move, hopefully, to the upper right. So let's talk for a minute about what you want for your child or your loved one. What are some things you want to see happen, to see them accomplish? You hope to see them do or experience in life. How about just being happy, being healthy, having friends, or having other people care about them, being important to other people, being as independent as possible? So these are pretty common responses. We want all of these wonderful things for the people that we love. So what if there was kind of a predictor for that kind of life? And it turns out that there kind of is. So let's take a look at some things that are more likely for people under certain circumstances and ask ourselves if these things align with the lives that we want for our son, daughter, and loved ones, right? So then we'll go back and fill in that blank and talk a little bit more about that. And by the way, this information that we're going to see comes from the National Core Indicators. If you don't know what that is, it's a survey that's administered to people in the developmental disabilities field with the goal of learning more about trends. So they kind of take all the data and then summarize it in a report. So first, people without blank are more likely to live in their own homes or apartments, so have some more independence in that area, have their own place. Be involved in making choices about their lives. So this is kind of what we all want, right? We don't want someone else telling us what we have to do every step of the way. Be included in their community, so have real connections to other people. Have community jobs or service plans with this goal in mind, have a fulfilling job or employment experience. Have their rights respected. Again, something that we all want, that is important to us, that some of us take for granted. Be supported to communicate with friends. This comes back to connection again, and we know that having those connections helps us be happier and healthy in life. Being able to go on dates, have real relationships, and even get married. So it turns out that people without a guardian are more likely to experience these things in their lives. Now, we're certainly not saying that guardianship in and of itself is bad, only that we know these things tend to be true of people without guardians. And one other note, people who have more self-determination, more control in their own lives are better able to resist neglect and abuse, which can make them safer too, because they know their rights, they know what to speak up about. So that's something to think about as we move forward. So let's go back to this, that life trajectory. The other way we use this tool is to identify things that we don't want for our loved ones, the things we're trying to avoid. So what kinds of things come to mind for you when you think about this? Being unhappy, maybe not being respected or being taken advantage of. How about being lonely, not reaching their potential? Now, of course, there's more that we could talk about. And sometimes it's easier to talk about what we're afraid of, but we'll get to that in a minute. But do these resonate? Are they things that in general you would want to avoid for your child as they go through life? So let's take a look at some more research. And this time, think about that last exercise, the things that you wanted to avoid as much as possible for your loved one. So when a guardian makes decisions for a person, some of these things can happen. They might not develop the skills that they need, especially around decision making in life, because they're used to relying on other people. They might not be included when important decisions are made about their lives. So imagine how that feels if someone is making all of those decisions for you, or you're just not being included. You have to learn it secondhand. They might have low self-esteem, be passive, have feelings of inadequacy and incompetency, which then can really prevent somebody from reaching their full potential. It might affect their physical and mental well-being, and this is very real. And when we talk about someone being happy and healthy in life, this is very relevant. They might feel hopeless, helpless, or self-critical, perhaps as a result of just not feeling like they have control over their own life. They might be deprived of dignity of risk. Now, this is a really important concept, but one that can be challenging to grasp and come to terms with. But the idea is that life involves risk. We all make mistakes and we learn from those. No one's trying to be reckless, but we take calculated risks in our lives without knowing what the outcome is going to be. And we grow from these things. So we have the right to do that. People with disabilities are sometimes deprived of that right because we fear for their safety, right? And they might not be included in treatment planning by medical professionals. So again, imagine this for ourselves. If someone was deciding what was going to happen to us and with us medically, procedures, medications, things like that, and we didn't really have a say in that, how might that feel? So we're not saying that guardians are bad people by any means. The information here is just what we know. Part of what we're doing is just having these conversations, helping people kind of be aware, because if you don't know, how can you be expected to do anything differently, right? So now that we have a better sense of these things, how do we get here? How do we get to guardianship so early and so often for many people? Well, we're back at the life trajectory again, and this can represent an entire person's life or smaller periods of time. But in this case, let's look at it as if it were a person's life. And remember, we can use it to plan things that we want to have happen. Well, we noticed that right around here, a lot of times something interesting was happening, which is at the age of 18, parents are pursuing guardianship for their son or daughter. Many parents feel like they have to pursue it because they heard about this process early on. It kind of becomes a foregone conclusion because we think it's best. We think it solves the problems. And why? What do we think that guardianship is going to do? Well, most often we hear that guardianship is a way to protect the person that we love, to keep them safe, right? Now, there's actually been no study that shows that a person with a guardian is safer than a person without a guardian. But I don't expect that to change anybody's mind. So how about we face some of these fears together, kind of call them out and discuss them. What are they? So here's one parent's perspective. Her name is Janice Fitzgerald, and she wrote a really amazing summary of her experience, kind of figuring this stuff out along the way. These are quotes from the early stages of her experience. So see if you can relate to her. She starts by saying some of these fears were valid, right? We're not trying to dismiss them. They feel very real, and some of them make a lot of sense. And we do want to protect people from certain things. She goes on to say that she was an expert at worry and fear. It kind of became all-consuming. She tried to protect and control her son's environment. And many of us can relate to that when we want what we think is best. We want people to be safe. We want to feel like we have control over everything that happens, which ultimately is impossible, but we do what we can. The things that she felt the need to fear were endless. They just kept going day in and day out, which can be exhausting. When she feared for the future, she lost time living in the present. So really being able to be there for people and with people in the moment. And then she finally asked the question, how can anyone learn and enjoy life in an environment of fear and control? So I think that this is what happens a lot of the time. We go straight to that protective role. And legal guardianship sounds like the right thing to do, like it's going to meet the need. But in doing so, we're kind of setting a precedent that can stick with a person for a long time, sometimes their entire life. But there's so much other stuff going on that you're trying to figure out about, how the system works, that there's not always a lot of time or energy to explore and understand it all. Okay, so here are some quotes from that same parent later on in her experience, more of a reflection on what she learned. She said, with guidance, support, and deep listening, everyone can participate in decision-making. That successful decision-making builds confidence and strengthens experience. That the younger that we start this, the younger we practice it, the more experience a person will gain. And that the more experience they have, the more personal growth they can accomplish. But also that not all decisions work out as anticipated. And that's a really important lesson. So we touched on this with dignity and risk, right? We all make mistakes. And if we prevent people from being able to make mistakes, well, in some ways we prevent them from growing and really taking ownership of their decisions and their life. Now, sometimes guardianship is the right thing to do, but even the courts agree that it should be the last resort. The rules that govern guardianship in probate court, and even the training that guardians have to go through, they're all really clear about this. Guardianship should only be used when there are no other, less restrictive options available. Because guardianship is actually a removal of a person's rights to make decisions in their life. So think about this. If a person does need some help with some decisions in their life, does that mean that their right to make most or all other decisions in their life should be taken away? Or should we focus more on other ways to help them with those specific decisions first? So what else is there then? We talked about these other less restrictive options. What do they look like? Well, there are actually a lot of options available, and we're only going to talk about some of them, but they give you a pretty good idea of the things that you can try. Now, the kind of help that's best will depend on the kinds of decisions being made and on the person. So let's start with something like money. Someone who needs help to manage or budget their money doesn't necessarily need a guardian. A payee is a person or agency that's assigned to manage a person's benefit money. They make sure that important bills and expenses get paid and that a person has access to money that's left over for other things they want or need in their life. Now, a good payee can also help a person understand their budget and involve them in the decision-making process so they can learn that skill. A trust fund is a way to keep larger amounts of money without it affecting the person's benefits or their eligibility for them, like Medicaid or a waiver. They can be set up in different ways and money can be saved and then dispersed for certain things, ensuring that the person has access to what they need without having to take full responsibility for that large sum of money and for managing that. A power of attorney, sometimes called a POA, is an arrangement where someone gives decision-making authority for certain things to someone else who they trust. Now, that person who's giving the authority has to be competent. They have to understand what they're doing at the time, and they can decide the scope of that authority. So what kinds of things that other person can and cannot make decisions about. And they can change their mind if they want to. They can decide they want someone else or that they don't want anyone to have that authority anymore. And as long as they change their mind while they're still competent, that's fine. But you can have a POA for things like healthcare and financial decisions. So supported decision-making is a worldwide movement that's gained a lot of momentum lately. The whole idea is that we all need help to make some decisions sometimes. You and I might ask friends, family, or experts for help to make certain decisions, to kind of understand information better before we decide. So this is all about doing the exact same thing, just for people who happen to have disabilities. Finding people to help them understand information so they can make and learn from their own decisions instead of taking that right away from them. Now in Ohio, we also have this chosen rep option, and this allows someone to appoint someone else to make decisions for them about DD, developmental disability services. Now it is voluntary, both parties have to agree, but there's an acknowledgement form that they sign. Again, this is only for the services that a person receives in a DD system, not for other kinds of decisions. A conservator is an option when someone is mentally able to make decisions, but due to some physical limitation, they need help. And the court can actually assign a conservator in these situations. Technology options are so vast nowadays, especially lately, from in-home assistants like Alexa to various apps that help us get around or connect with people, or video chat and checking in from our home, or devices that remind us to do important things like take our medication. We're really selling people short if we don't think about how technology might help them. And in something as simple as a release of information, this allows important information to be shared with you or someone else so that you can stay informed and help a person understand information and make decisions if necessary. So there are definitely more options out there than just these, but you can see that before we even start to consider guardianship, we've got a lot of exploring to do with these other things. Now, the nice thing about most of these options is that they can be used together. So for example, you might make use of a payee to help with money and supported decision-making for help with like where you're going to live or housing. And then technology as a way to help remember to take care of important things during the day. Almost any combination of these options that works for a person can be used. But a lot of this has to do with that idea that people with disabilities have the right to make their own decisions instead of having someone else make them on their behalf, even if it means they need a little help to do that, to make those decisions. So let's revisit that for a moment, because that's called supported decision making. What is it? Well, one of the guys who's been really involved in helping supported decision making happen is a lawyer named Jonathan Martinez. Here's what he has to say about it, that it's not one size fits all. So it can look a lot of different ways for a lot of different people, okay? But it happens when people choose trusted friends and family members, professionals, to help them understand situations and choices they face so they can make their own decisions. Remember, this all starts with that idea of people having the right to make their own decisions, that with help, people can learn decision-making skills. So how about for parents? What's this process look like? Well, to help your child or loved one with supported decision-making, you first need to help them get the information they need to make a choice. So a little bit of research might be involved here. And then help your child think through all the parts of the choice they're making and its impact. And finally, help them talk to or work with the people who need to know what choice they've made. When you support your child, you don't make the decision for them, you help them make the decision for themselves. Now, of course, depending on the age of the child, parents still have a responsibility to guide and make decisions for their son or daughter. What we're talking about here is helping your son or daughter develop that skill to make decisions over time. So what should we actually do then? What should we focus on if we're looking at this life trajectory or a smaller period of time? What kinds of things can we do? Well, you might consider involving your son or daughter in the IEP meetings. Imagine someone planning your life, but not inviting you to those planning meetings. Whenever and wherever possible, Involve the person in his or her IEP meeting, listen to them and encourage their voice. This will pay huge dividends long-term for them, to help them feel included, to help them feel like what they say and what they think matters. Practice making decisions. Then this can start small. Think about how many decisions we make every day, what to eat, what to wear, sometimes what to do with our day. These are easy ways to start, but then move on to other kinds of decisions, deciding between two or more options, how to handle friendships, things like that. But remember, this is about supporting them to make their own decisions. Learn and review our rights, because if we don't know what our rights are, it's hard to practice them or stand up for them. We can end up ignorant if we're not aware, and much more likely to be taken advantage of. Point out situations where they have a right or can practice that right, or even when maybe a right hasn't been respected but should have been. Learn and grow from mistakes. We all make them. We often learn more from the mistakes than we do from the things that go well in life. We talked about dignity of risk, right? The idea that we should be able to take certain risks in life. Much of what makes life worth living involves adventure and kind of going outside of our comfort zones. So the sooner that we learn to accept that we make mistakes, the better we're going to be able to grow from them. Otherwise, we might end up too afraid to try things for fear of failure. All right, this one's really important. Focus on strengths and abilities. Now, we know that there's a system out there that tries to meet the needs that your son or daughter is going to have, even in adult life. But too often, I think we find that we're discussing deficits and weaknesses and what somebody needs rather than what they love, what they enjoy, what they're good at. So make sure you're spending some time focusing on those things, because when people have opportunities to do things that they love, that they're good at, well, that's when they really come alive and thrive. So make sure we're talking about those things. Self-advocacy groups, look for these. Most places have something like People First. These are groups people can join to learn how to speak up for themselves. They get to be around others who kind of have a similar mission or goal in mind, and they can practice these skills and be a voice in their communities. Learning to say no. This one is very much related to knowing our rights too. It's about being assertive and taking ownership for our decisions in our lives. It's a really important part of having some control in our lives. Expanding your network. This means meeting people, connecting with people, getting to know people, because the larger and more connected our network is, well, the more people we have to support us when we need it, especially with decision making, right? The more people that I know, the more likely I am to know someone who can help me with this or that. So where can you look? Well, things like those self-advocacy groups or even parent support groups, those are great, but don't overthink it. Look to your day-to-day life, your community. Who do you come in contact with? Where are the places that your son or daughter could meet people and be known, where if they don't show up, people miss them? The bank, the grocery store, your church, places like that. It's these natural relationships that really help us live good lives in the end. And then talk about the future. This is really the point. Remember, all of this is to support a better future for people, a life worth living. But if we don't know what they want, if we're not thinking about it because we're feeling too overwhelmed with staying safe today, well, life tends to pass us by. But if we have a clear idea or understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, well, we have a better idea of what kinds of decisions we're going to be faced with. And then we can plan to get support for those where we need it. Now, with that said, sometimes thinking about the future, especially too far into the future, can feel overwhelming. We don't know what the future holds. Sometimes we don't know what today holds, and we're just trying to get through today or this week, right? In those cases, condense this down to a more manageable period of time. Instead of thinking about 10 or 20 years in the future, think about the next 2 to 3 years, or even the next year. Or what do you want kindergarten to look like? What do you want the first half of the school year to look like? Think about the experiences involved in that and the decisions that we can help people make. And then learn about your options. This is about continuing to educate ourselves. What else is out there? What haven't we tried yet that might work better? We're giving you some options today, but I encourage you to take some time to just Google search supported decision making and see what you find. And this is part of your network too. become a part of groups that can connect you to additional resources. There are a lot of Facebook groups out there as well that can give you that information. So I also want you to see what all of those options kind of look like laid out in front of you. Just so you know that there are many of them, and they don't have to be done in any particular order, but the more of them you do, the closer you get to those outcomes that we talked about, those wonderful things that you want for your loved one in the upper right-hand corner. All right, so I wanted to end on a video from another parent, because these are real stories about real lives, but you can sense how much this father loves his son and kind of start to understand how that's the reason that he looked at other options.
The South Carolina Supported Decision-Making Project, a collaborative effort between ABLE South Carolina, Protection and Advocacy, Family Connection, and the ARC of South Carolina, funded by the South Carolina Developmental Disabilities Council.
A Better Way, stories from the South Carolina Supported Decision-Making Project. A family's perspective.
Yeah, I like to hunt.
Carl is an incredible 21-year-old young man with a passion for life.
I thought 9-point bud because since I got to know the word 9.
Excited about learning, excited about the world that he wants to live in.
I can be a tour guide and lead him.
Carl has some challenges with intellectual disability, and occasionally he needs me to explain something to him in a way that he can really, really get it.
This is 2, 3, 4.
If I go out and I get, I'm going to buy a car, I turn to my dad, I said, Dad, you know, this car, this has better mileage, this has this. I go to a friend and they say, no, you got 3 kids, you're going to need more space in the back seat, you're going to need the, and I get a lot of input from a lot of people. People look at me and say, oh, he has a lot of wisdom because he's willing to have supports from other people. Yet when a person with intellectual disabilities needs supports, we say they're disabled. And I don't see where the difference is. Yeah. Supported decision making is how do we, as all of us as human beings, surround ourselves with a group of people who will help us when the process of decision making is needed. And for Carl, I'd like it to be a very clearly documented and structural way that would happen.
I've been doing impressionist art.
It amazes me how many parents have jumped straight to guardianship because they're afraid someone's going to take advantage of their child.
This picture I did.
So I think parents go into it wanting to make sure that they can get medical information on their children, still help make medical decisions for their children, make sure that somebody doesn't take advantage of them financially and doesn't take advantage of them with decision making. So they think the cure-all is guardianship. The most painful things for me as a supporter of families of kids with special needs is for so many years, all I promoted is guardianship. And that I did it because I wanted to protect our kids. I wanted our children to have a safe place to be. But I really did act out of fear. I have literally counseled parents to take away their children's civil rights. I had a change of heart when ABLE South Carolina sat down and met with me the first time, and Kimberly, the executive director, looked at me and she said, WC, do you want Carl special or do you want him equal? And that changed everything for me.
Do you want to get married one day?
Yep, I would. Yes, I would. If my dad let me to.
If I let you to, it's your decision, not
Yeah,
mine.
I would do it, yes.
You're smiling real big.
Right.
Fear keeps us from moving forward. This is for not just disability world, for anything. But faith in the future moves a person forward. So I would rather walk in faith than I would walk in fear. And faith says, okay, I believe that there is a way to make this work. There are supports out there. You know, there's ARC, there's ABLE, there's Protection and Advocacy, there's Family Connection. There's a group of people out there that are willing to surround people and help them think through that process.
Okay, so this is really just an introduction to the idea of supported decision making. There's a lot of information out there, and we want to help you find what's right for you and your family. We have trainings, videos, and other resources we'd love to connect you to. And if we don't have exactly what you want or need, we'll look for it. We'll try to create it. So please reach out with any questions that you might have. My contact information is at the bottom of the slide. You can email me at jyoung@ohionetworkforinnovation.com, or just give me a call at 740-485-5869. And we also have a Facebook page that you can follow. Just look up Ohio Network for Innovation, and some of our posts could have some really good resources for you. So we hope you see the value of giving supported decision-making a try. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about it. It's a process and it's a learning experience, but you are not alone. We're here to help.